Hello, everyone. I'm Gretchen Wall. I'm the coordinator of the Preduce Safety Alliance and also the Northeast Extension Associate. Welcome to our PSA Annual Trainers and Lead Trainers Update webinar. And just a few housekeeping items before we get started. I see some questions in the chat, but I think these will be addressed here in the next minute. Everybody during this webinar is going to be muted just because we are expecting quite a large audience. There will be some time for questions and discussions at the end of the meeting, but feel free to use either the Q&A functionality or the chat box functionality. All of the PSA team members are on today to help answer your questions, so we will be monitoring that quite frequently. We will be posting notes after this meeting, and they will be available in both English and Spanish. Today's presentation itself will be conducted in English. And as I mentioned, the session will be recorded and the presentation will be shared on the listserv and on our website after the call. The other thing that I wanted to make note of is that Rob, who has already started posting in the chat box, Rob is going to be posting a whole bunch of web links that we're going to be talking about today. Don't get too frantic about trying to copy those all down or open them all at once. I am going to include those in the notes, and you'll have those available to you after the call is over. But there are quite a few links in this presentation to resources and to other information that is valuable to you as PSA trainers. We have a pretty packed agenda for today's call. Today's call is actually scheduled for an hour and a half, just because last year we realized we had a lot of updates to share. So if you need to drop off, this is going to be recorded. But today we're going to be covering everything from team updates to training metrics. You'll hear a little bit about our new courses, course types, remote trainings and online trainings. We'll do some general policy updates and reminders. Donna's going to cover some of the FDA updates that have occurred over the past year. Tommy's going to be covering some of our new and updated educational materials that are available to you. Laura is going to be covering our Spanish website and resources. And then Betsy's going to wrap it up with some of our international training updates and our funding and future outlook. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Betsy Bin, who's the PSA's director and also a senior extension associate at Cornell University. Betsy?
Thanks, Gretchen. I really appreciate it. I love starting this off and appreciate all of your time to attend this meeting. We had about 400 people registered, and that's a lot of time and value that is given to the PSA. So I want to just thank everyone for taking the time to be with us today. I get to do the fun part, which is talk a little bit about the Preduce Safety Alliance team and the good folks that are working with us. Give me one moment so I can silence my kid in the other room. Sorry. It's a perfect time to roll a chip bag. So as you can see on the screen right here, this is the Preduce Safety Alliance team when you were on the call last year. The box in the south was filled by Kristen Woods, who left us to take a full-time position with Alabama Extension. But Donna out in the southwest, Connie in the northwest, Don in the midwest, Gretchen, as she mentioned, in the northeast. Then there's Laura Cunha-Maldonado, who is our Spanish language extension associate. And then, of course, Rob and Michelle in the office with me. Well, we were fortunate that next slide, Gretchen. We were fortunate that Tommy Saunders joined us in March of this year, and he filled the position left by Kristen Woods. And I have a slide of him, but we are also even more fortunate that in the last 2 weeks, we have had the addition of 2 additional Spanish language extension associates. That would be Davis Blasini, who is located in Arizona, and Ricardo Orellana, who's located in Massachusetts. You'll also see here Toria Melville has been working with our team on a casual basis to help us catch up with evaluations and get on top of a lot of paperwork that has piled up over the COVID time. So very excited to have the team expand, and as always, cannot say enough about the work that this group has done. You're going to hear a lot about the changes that have gone on, much of it due to the result of the COVID outbreak. And I do want to take this moment just to thank the entire team for their continued dedication, even in these bizarre times of moving forward with produce safety. Next slide. So a little more about Tommy. Tommy's located in Richmond, Virginia. He has a background in food safety and microbiology. We stole him shamelessly out of the Virginia Tech system and are super happy to have him. He's done great. For those of you who have started a new job during COVID, you will know how weird that is, but Tommy has done a spectacular job. It is with a little bit of a broken heart as a University of Florida alumni that I have to say that in a typical fall, he'd be cheering for the Hokies in Lane Stadium, but we try not to hold that against him. Tommy, if you want to unmute and say something, it'll bring your face to the front of their screen so they can see who you are.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Like Betsy said, I'm Tommy Saunders, and very excited to be here on my first trainer call with everybody in the group. So looking forward to it.
Thank you, Tommy. Next slide. This is Davis, and he is located in Arizona. His background's in plant phys, microbiology, bilingual education, and water quality and conservation. He worked for the University of Arizona, Maricopa Agricultural Center, and has been involved in a lot of food safety related projects. We are super happy to have him. He graduated with BS in biology from Northeastern Illinois University, and then has his master's in biology from Arizona State. He has been with us a whopping 2.5 weeks, I think. So Davis, you want to unmute yourself so they can see you?
Sure. Yeah, it's an honor working with all you guys. You are amazing. And yeah, I'm here for your Hispanic community. I'm from Caracas, Venezuela. And yeah, happy to be with you and, working in all these amazing projects that you have.
Super. Thanks, Davis. And last, but certainly not least, I will say greenest, since he just started last Friday, is Ricardo Orellana. He is located in Massachusetts. He has a background in agriculture and plant sciences. He was located in Paraguay when we found him. He's now back in the US, so we're happy to have him stateside. He has his BS in agriculture from Zamorano, which is in Honduras, and his PhD in plant and soil science from the University of Massachusetts, Amherst. So Ricardo, you want to unmute so your face comes to the forefront here?
Thank you, Betsy. It is a great pleasure to be here and also be part of this talented team. Thank you for allowing me to be part of this family now. And, I'm happy to serve the Spanish community too. And it is a great pleasure participating into this webinar today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ricardo. So that's probably the funnest part of this webinar, and I'm happy I got to be the person who did it. Next.
Well, way to set me up for failure, Betsy. We're going to go into talking about some of our training numbers, which I think are equally as exciting as our new team member additions. But as many of you are aware, we do put out quarterly reports. What you're seeing on the screen right now are a snapshot of data that is to come out here shortly. We are doing some rearrangements of our quarterly reports that you'll see some changes, mainly related to the fact that we launched 2 new course types this year. So the remote trainings and then the online trainings. So we're trying to integrate that in a way that makes sense so that states and regions and countries can calculate how many courses of each type are actually happening. But in general, since the last time we met in October of 2019, we have another huge increase in the total number of grower training participants, much in part due to all of the trainers like you who are on this call. We've trained over 60,000 grower training participants and over 3,000 train the trainer participants. So I think you all should give yourself a huge pat on the back, especially because this year has not been an easy one. There's been a lot of challenges unforeseen, especially related to doing trainings in person. So we really appreciate your flexibility going forward and getting out there and continuing to do those remote trainings and making that available to growers worldwide. But we have hosted in total since our launch of PSA training courses, 75 domestic train the trainer courses, and there are 256 lead trainers, over 2,000 trainers. And then internationally, we've hosted 24 train the trainer courses in conjunction with our TOTS who are doing those internationally. And we have over 1,000 trainers internationally and 198 lead trainers. So those are continuing to grow. There have been some fantastic efforts, especially in the international realm over the past few years that Betsy will talk about at the end of today's presentation. But we're definitely seeing that cadre of trainers grow. And I've seen some chat in the chat box from international participants as well. So welcome from wherever you're coming from in the world. And then with our grower training courses, domestically, a little over 38,000 grower training participants, over 17,000 or 1,700 grower training courses, 38,000 participants, and then internationally, 834 grower training courses and 22,000 grower participants. So some pretty big numbers there. I wanted to show you just this map of domestic PSA grower trainings. Now, this includes both the in-person and remote delivery of courses. If you recall, last year, we had 1 or 2 states that were still left that hadn't received a PSA grower training, and that was filled in. So all states have received PSA grower trainings and continue to grow. And when you look at state by state, these are the top 11 states that have hosted PSA grower trainings: California, Washington, Florida, Michigan, and then there's a tie for Pennsylvania and Ohio for that last top 5 spot. But all states and all regions have done fabulously in getting these trainings out to their regions. When you look at the Train the Trainer course distribution, we have hosted a number of Train the Trainer courses all over the country, though I have to say that did slow down quite a bit over the past year. We put many Train the Trainer courses on pause that were planned for the spring due to COVID-19. We'll talk about some of our pilots that we are doing for the remote Train the Trainer course, recognizing the need to continue developing a cadre of trainers and lead trainers, both domestically and internationally. But in terms of top states hosting courses, Train the Trainer courses, California, Florida, New York, Washington, and then a whole bunch of ties for that last spot, as you can see there on the screen. And when you zoom out to globally, we have quite a few international courses, as I mentioned on the previous slide. But just to give you some perspective of international courses, we have hosted grower trainings in 22 countries, with the top countries being Mexico, Chile, Ecuador, Peru, and Costa Rica. And we've also hosted 24 Train the Trainer courses in 11 different countries, with Mexico, Chile, Peru, and Costa Rica hosting the majority of those courses. So it's nice to see that distribution go worldwide, and we anticipate that that will continue going forward in some of our future efforts. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Connie, and she's going to talk about some of the remote training updates.
Gretchen, I'm going to break in here for a second. There was a question in the Q&A and I messed up the response by hitting answer live. There was a question about the total number of participants. They do not exclude duplicates. So if we happen to have had a person who attended 8 times because they couldn't get enough of the PSA program, they're going to be counted as number 8. So we don't weed out the duplicates that way in terms of the data set. But we do have people that attend more than once, but I would not think that would happen a lot. Okay, so sorry about that. Connie.
That's a great clarification. And also Rob did drop in the chat box that I see the access to our training reports. And like I said, what you were seeing on that first slide was some data that should be coming out here shortly with our new report. So keep an eye out for that, and we'll share that through the listserv, and it'll be posted on the website as well. So Connie?
Great. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our remote course. This is in response to the COVID-19 pandemic back in April of 2020. We amended our policy for PSA grower training delivery to allow for remote courses using apps like Zoom or WebEx, other web conferencing platforms. We're currently up to version 7 of that policy, and it was updated just last month. So if you haven't seen it yet, please check out our website. This temporary policy is currently in effect until April 30th of 2021, but that might get extended again pending updates on the pandemic. So again, stay tuned for those details. We do share those via social media when they get posted on our website. All right, next. Another new thing to know about, this one just came out last week. The maximum enrollment for a remote training is now 30 participants. Our recommendation is really 10 to 20, and that seems to be what most trainers are comfortable with as well. And the reason this came about is because we were getting some evaluation comments from really large classes where it seemed like the learning experience wasn't up to what we would like it to be. So that's where this policy came from. So again, that just came out last week. And that was emailed out to the trainer listserv. So if you didn't see it, check your junk folder. But that is now a new policy, 30 participant maximum for remote trainings. Next. We also have a couple other resources available on our website that you may or may not be aware of. So I want to draw attention to them. The first is an educator call we held back in May. We had Heather Russell from Cornell Cooperative Extension who taught us how to avoid Zoom bombing. She shared a lot of security features in Zoom that might be important for not only your PSA grower trainings that are offered remotely, but your other many Zoom calls we have during COVID-19. In that same call, I shared some general tips for using the Zoom tools to engage your audience. And Jovana Kovacevic with the Western Regional Center also explained how to use Zoom's polling feature, specifically to administer the pre and post test that our regional centers are using. And then the last bullet you see there is a fact sheet we put together for growers with tips if they're preparing to join a Zoom call for the first time and may not be familiar with the platform. It kind of walks them through what the bandwidth requirements are so they can be set up for success in your course. So I really recommend sharing that link with your marketing materials so that they can look through it before they decide to pay to register. Okay, next. So some statistics about the remote course so far this year. Based on our latest numbers, there have been more than 94 domestic remote grower training courses with more than 1,350 participants, which is just amazing. The top 9 host states in order of number of courses kind of match what we saw in the previous map: California, Arizona, Kentucky, Puerto Rico, New Mexico, Hawaii, Oregon, Texas, and South Carolina. So a lot of states are offering these, and we know that even more folks are going to be offering them this fall and in the spring. So those numbers are just going to continue to grow. We've also had a lot of remote international grower trainings. So far, there have been 69 international courses with more than 1,300 participants. And again, those top states hosting those courses are Mexico, Peru, Chile, Ecuador, Honduras, Dominican Republic, Guatemala, and Argentina. And again, more and more folks are starting to offer those courses. So those numbers are just going to continue to grow. All right, next, thank you. All right, so another thing that came about is a lot of trainers seem to be holding off on offering the grower trainings, hoping that COVID-19 would be resolved. And so far, we're still fighting that. So when we offered, the PSA team offered a grower training back in September, because only about half the states had been offering grower trainings. So we knew there were some growers that needed to take the course but didn't have an option in their state. So we offered a PSA remote course back in September, and we had several trainers contact us asking if they could watch in, if they could just observe to get some tips on using Zoom and how to engage an audience when teaching remotely, to the point that we had more folks wanting to observe than growers actually signed up for the course. And so we really saw that there was a need. among our trainers to kind of have a bit of a refresher. And so our response to that was to come up with these Train the Trainer Refresher Office Hours, which we're currently offering every Thursday at noon. This is week 4. This Thursday, we'll be covering module 4. So we do 1 module per week. And basically what we're doing is just giving a high-level overview to remind you of what you learned about when you took the Train the Trainer course. We'll also add in any updates from FDA, any new PSA resources that have come out, and then we'll focus on those strategies for grower engagement, especially if you're teaching remotely. So if you have time to join us on Thursdays at noon, that's fantastic, because we spend about a half an hour going over all that stuff at a very high level. And then we turn off the recording and then we just answer questions for the next half hour. So if you do have questions about teaching remotely or about a specific module and how to present it, maybe you've never presented module 4, for example, but you're going to have to in January, please join us for those office hours. And if you can't make the office hour, at least watch the recording. Those are going to be posted on our trainer resources page and our trainer updates page. They're also available on our YouTube channel. And then you can always reach out to any of the regional extension associates or the Spanish language extension associates to ask for some of those tips about how to do specific things in Zoom. And registration is not required for those office hours. They're just open. So the connection details were shared in the chat. All right, lessons learned. We've learned a lot since this policy came out last spring. And we're continuing to learn. But here are some of the big takeaways. Number 1, remote courses take a lot more time than a face-to-face course. So this is just an example agenda. This is the one we used back in September. You don't have to use this agenda, but it did seem to work pretty well for us. One of the things on this agenda that I would change in the future is to add a little more time for modules 1 and 2. Modules 3 and 4 can go pretty fast, but the modules 1 and 2 really lay the foundation for the whole course. And so they do require a little bit more time. On this agenda, you also see that we broke it into 2 days. Zoom fatigue is real. And so we really felt that that was important both for the participants and for the trainers that we split it into 2 days. Plus, this allowed us to have participants in different time zones because, again, we knew that our audience for this particular training were folks in states that weren't currently offering the course, and they were across the country. My second big takeaway, we had 4 trainers for this course, and whoever wasn't training at the time had their hands full monitoring participation, monitoring the chat, keeping the presenter aware of their time. And we received feedback from our participants that they really enjoyed hearing from all those different voices. So we really think you could get by with 3 trainers and maybe 1 dedicated support person, but I wouldn't recommend trying to do it with just 2 trainers. That would just be brutal for everyone involved. My third big takeaway, really practice ahead of time. Even if you've been teaching the PSA grower training for years and you're a specialist in food safety, teaching in Zoom is a whole different world. So meet with your team ahead of time, walk through questions like which engagement activities are you going to use in module 3? Which activities are you going to use in module 6? Practice to make sure that your presentation fits in your allotted time. You know, we know that some presenters go over time and others zoom right through. So understanding that and understanding that our participants might get a little anxious, we actually deleted the times from this agenda before we shared it with participants. So they knew what time we were starting, they knew what time we were taking a break, and they knew what time we were ending. But then they wouldn't get stressed out if somebody went over or under. Think about which URLs you would like to share in the chat while you present. So as you've noticed, in this call, Rob Way's been adding links to the chat. That's because we all decided ahead of time what those links were going to be. I recommend the same thing for your grower training. If you're trying to share out links, have those planned out ahead of time. Think about who's going to monitor those participants. How's that going to be handled? Are you going to ask them to turn their cameras on during a particular discussion or activity? Are you going to take a screenshot of the hands raised or the yes, no answers in the participant window? Think through all of that ahead of time. Think about who's going to be responsible for alerting the presenter when they're running out of time. You've got 10 minutes, you've got 5 minutes, you're 10 minutes over, I'm cutting you off. You know, how are you going to do that? Is it going to be a group chat on your cell phones? So think through that ahead of time. But those are all important details that really need to be worked out ahead of the training so that once you get there, your participants don't see any of the crazy. It just flows. But that does take some work up front. And then my fourth big takeaway here is to add time at the beginning of day one, or even meet the night before for an hour. So participants who are new to Zoom can get oriented using the app. Make sure they know how to use the engagement tools that you as a team have decided you're going to use. We like using Annotate. So if you join us on Thursday for the office hour, you'll get to see Annotate. We also use, again, those nonverbal feedback in the participant window, things like that. So if you're going to use any of that, make sure that you give growers an opportunity to log on ahead of time to practice those tools. They also need to know how to change their name in the participant window to match what they registered as. So it doesn't just say dude or mute. I've had those show up in trainings. And then also how to mute and unmute themselves and how to turn on and off their video. So those are all things to practice ahead of time. Next. All right, the final thing I wanted to cover is to be very clear when marketing. It's critically important that trainers and course organizers use the correct terminology when they're promoting their courses so that participants clearly understand what they're signing up for. The remote delivery option is best for those who have blocks of time available and prefer to listen to a PSA lead trainer and trainers deliver the content as a live presentation over the internet. And they're committed to sitting there through that 5.5-hour day or whatever you set your agenda up as. The online option is best for those who maybe can't sit there for a whole day, but overall they have more time to invest. So our online grower training is very text heavy. It tends to take participants 15 to 30 hours to be successful in that course. And it's not face-to-face, it's not synchronous. So they have to log in on their own time and they have to be self-motivated. One of the differences there is the online course requires 6 discussion forum posts, and those are graded against a rubric. So you actually have to answer the questions. You can't just throw some spaghetti at the wall and hope that it counts. So it is a bit more work, but it does work better for some folks. So we want to make sure that our trainers are very deliberate in using those words. Do not say that you are offering an online course if what you're truly offering is a remote course over Zoom. So it's very important. There's a lot of detail on our website, which is there on the screen. It's going to be shared in the chat so that growers know what they're signing up for. And now I'm going to turn it over to Don, who's going to talk more about that online course.
Thanks, Connie. Can everybody hear me okay? Good. So we started working on the online version of the PSA grower training course after the in-person course launched and started running smoothly a few years back. The launch of that online option, though, was prioritized because we had a training gap when the COVID travel restrictions hit. We do not host the online course at PSA. It's hosted at eCornell, which is our sister organization at Cornell. And eCornell specializes in online learning. So that's the reason why we work through them to host the online version of the Produce Safety Alliance grower training course. When we developed it, we used the successful National Good Agricultural Practices online course as our model. Some of you may have been through that. And from that, you'll recognize the discussions that Connie described as she was talking about what's in the online course. In order to create this course, we did convert the entire set of PSA curriculum materials, including the notes and appendices, into some at-your-own-pace learning units. Reading those slides and notes would be pretty boring on their own, so we enhanced the learning experience by adding quizzes, videos, and written discussions. And those written discussions are the main way that the course instructor interacts with participants in this version of the course. So you can learn more about the online course format using that tiny URL on the screen or navigating to the page on the PSA website. I put a little yellow arrow so you can find it. Can we go ahead and go to the next slide? And I'll give a little bit of a history that since April, we've hosted 14 sessions of this course already. We've had almost 200 participants successfully complete the course, and those participants have come from 41 states and 1 territory. From memory, since everybody else had a top 5 list, We did have most of our participants came from California, with a substantial number from Washington State and New York State. There was some incentivization to get participants into our courses in both Washington and New York. But we've had a lot of representation, onesies and twosies, from across the country, including a US territory. In addition to those 14 finished sessions, we have one session that recently ended, 2 more in progress, and then we're going to do a double header at the end of October, for which there are 13 seats still available. We'll take a break for the rest of 2020 because the holidays make it very difficult to schedule a 3-week duration course. And then starting in 2021, to everyone's sheer and utter joy, we have 6 more months of new sessions that will be on a 3-week rotation. So at this time, PSA provides all of the instruction in the online grower training course. That's one way to keep the cost of the course down. And that cost is $125. The cost covers the certificate and some hosting expenses. And there's something special about the printed manual that we'll talk about on a different slide. Next slide, please. One thing that's nice about the online version of the course is that we are able to handle international participants. And we'll talk about some of the challenges with international participation in remote delivery courses in that mode when we talk about the requirement for a printed manual. If people ask you about the remote delivery course, the online course, the in-person course, Connie started this, but I want to really emphasize that the online delivery mode is not the ideal mode for everyone. In particular, fluency in English is crucial. The main method of learning and the main method of communication in this course is by reading and writing in English. So it's really, really important that everyone is comfortable and has good strengths reading and writing in English in order to make it through this course. The delivery mode is really good for some individuals, in particular those who have an active interest in the topic. They want to dig into the materials because all the resources like the FDA guidance, the PSA fact sheets, these are all easily accessible in the course through links, and people commonly link out into and maybe even get lost into the rabbit holes that they go down to learn more about some of the topics. Some individuals are able to work through the material in less than 15 hours. Most people report spending up to 30 hours, and some people even spend over 40 hours. Despite that time, and you'll notice we're talking about twice the time for an in-person course, and for those who take a longer time, it's more than 5 times as much time for a live delivery. We haven't had complaints about how much time it takes people, but we have also found that some people are not able to successfully complete the course in this delivery mode. So I just want to emphasize how important it is for prospective students and participants in this delivery mechanism to understand the format and the time commitment. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. There are a few things that are different, a few things that are special about the PSA the online version of the course, not just the instructors. One of them is that this is the only delivery format where the printed manual is not a requirement. Participants are encouraged to purchase a printed manual separately from the bookstore. Past participants report that when they used the printed manual, they used it a lot and really appreciated it as a resource. But because it's an online delivery mechanism, everything that's in the printed manual is also visible in the online course, including the notes and the appendices. That's different from a live delivery, whether that live delivery is in person or remote, because in a live delivery, only the slide content's available on the screen. The instructor talks through the notes, the instructor adds their own insights into the topic, but the participant needs a printed manual in front of them so that they have access to the notes and to the appendices. And that's why the printed manual is still required for in-person and remote delivery, but in the online course, it's in front of them on the screen. And Gretchen is going to introduce the PDF version of the manual that is acceptable in lieu of a printed manual for the online course. Although the printed manual is a valuable resource, removing that requirement for a printed manual is one way that it helped us remove the shipping barrier. Shipping the printed manual was getting in the way of enrolling international participants. And so by taking away that requirement, which none of us loved that option, but by taking away that requirement, we were able to open the door for international participation in the online section of the course. Another thing that's different about the online course is that nobody can sit quietly in the corner of the room and just sit there and passively experience the materials. There are 6 required discussions, meaning that every participant has direct one-on-one engagement with the lead trainer who instructs the course. Those discussion topics allow participants to apply risk reduction practices and training requirements in the course to real-world scenarios and get feedback from the lead trainer. Our past participants, 200 people have been through the course. Many of them write in some comments in their evaluations, and they commonly say that during those discussions solidified their understanding of the material, and that the instructor feedback helped them confirm or adjust their understanding of the material. So those discussions are one reason why the online version of the course is 2 to 5 times more time expensive compared with the live delivery, but there is a benefit for those who are looking to learn that material more deeply. So I hope this helps you understand more about the online delivery course and that you're able to communicate that with people who ask you about that. And we'll go to the next slide and the next speaker.
And Don, there was actually a question that came in that I think is really relevant.
Yeah.
Can online participants access information from the manual after completion of the course?
Right. So they will have the opportunity to download the PDF version of the manual, which is theirs to keep. But then they also have access through the eCornell interface to all the materials in the course, including their discussions, and they can view the discussions that other people submitted. So they have all that information, all those resources through their past course history at eCornell. And eCornell assures us that they have, I'm sure it's not forever, but for as long as the course is still up on eCornell, they'll have access to that material.
Awesome. Thanks, Don.
You bet.
All right. Well, I wanted to go into a few of the policy changes and reminders that happened over the past year. As we've talked about before, 2 of the major changes to programming included the addition of the temporary remote training policy and also some evaluation changes for in-person trainings that actually we just announced on Friday. So let me first start by talking about the evaluations for remote trainings. Connie did talk about the policies related for remote training, so I'm not going to go back through that. But as part of a remote training, when you register a course with AFTO, you will be provided a Qualtrics evaluation URL link. And that is something that is unique to the course. Just like when you received a paper evaluation to hand out at your in-person trainings, that ID information actually links back to you and the other trainers that might be involved with your course so that we can keep track of that in our database. So make sure you're not reusing those links. You must achieve a 50% return rate for the Qualtrics evaluations. And if we see that you have not achieved that for 3 or more of your remote courses, the PSA lead trainers, all of them who are registered on those courses, could potentially be revoked for delivering remote courses. So just keep that in mind. You really need to be reminding participants to fill out those Qualtrics evaluations or even devoting time during the training to allow them to fill those the evaluations out. Secondly, some changes for in-person trainings, which we do have some in-person trainings occurring right now with, socially distanced practices and things in place. But there are 2 primary changes if you are going to be hosting an in-person course for evaluation specifically. One of those is who you return the evaluations back to. Traditionally, when you hosted an in-person course, you get the confirmation email from AFTO. Once your course is all wrapped up, you send the packet of evaluations back to the AFTO office. Because of COVID-19, AFTO is not in their office full time, and we've been having some issues with shipments of evaluations getting returned if they're not present there. Not to mention just shipping in general from AFTO to us. It's just an extra added step. So going forward, if you do an in-person PSA grower training, you will return your paper evaluations to the PSA, and the address will be included in your registration email. So don't feel like you have to write this down now, but do make a mental note that those will get sent back to PSA and not AFTO. The second big announcement is that we actually just launched on Friday a new option for scanning paper evaluations. So this would remove the need for you to physically snail mail a packet back to the PSA with all of the evaluations in there. There is a link, which I'm sure Rob has dropped into the chat box, that includes all of the instructions. And I think this will provide a lot of relief, especially for our international trainers who were encountering some significant barriers in shipping evaluations, not only in cost, but just getting them out of the country and into the US. We were having issues with customs and all kinds of issues. So there is a scanning process. Be sure to follow those instructions very carefully, because as you know, we use this program called Remark, which basically scans the evaluations. On our end, we use a program that tabulates all of the responses, including the written responses, and then we can provide those reports to you. But if you don't scan them properly from the get-go, it's very difficult for us to utilize that program, and then you won't have access to a nice summary report. We will contact you if there are issues. If we see you upload your evaluation set and there are issues, you'll likely get an email from Rob, because he's the one who is managing that process. But that is another option for returning in-person training evaluations. And just as a reminder, for both of those course types, for both remote trainings and for in-person trainings, do not reuse the evaluations. So don't reuse that link, and don't reuse a paper evaluation, because again, that training ID is going to be tied to your information in our database. And we don't want that to be cataloged multiple times for your training. Other policy reminders. Printed PSA grower training manuals. This has been something that we've gotten a lot of questions about regarding individuals who are hosting remote PSA grower trainings or in person. As you know, with in-person courses, we have always required the physical printed copy of the manual. That is also the same requirement for a PSA remote grower training. Participants must have that physical manual prior to the start of the course. So if you're doing a remote training, one way to make sure that your participants receive this is to order well in advance and make sure that you're shipping well in advance, so they make sure that they have that on hand at the time of the course. We also recommend that during a remote course, you have them physically hold up the manual so that you can see that they have one, or use confirmation of tracking. So any shipping method you can track to make sure that they've received that manual. But it really is good to have a visual confirmation, since in a remote training, you're going to have visual confirmation of their presence anyway. Before you even get started with that training, they need to have a physical copy of the manual. The second part is that they cannot be expected, participants cannot be expected to print their own manual. If you have experience carrying around those manuals to set up for an in-person training, they are quite thick and it is a lot of paper. And I can tell you, even my little office printer would be really struggling to print out an entire manual. You'd probably use up at least an ink cartridge or more. So do not expect, and you cannot have your participants printing their own manuals at home. It's important that they receive a physical copy from the bookstore. Secondly, as Don referred to earlier, this is something new as a resource that we have made available. Previously, we had the printed manuals available. You could purchase them from the bookstore, or you could also download the individual files. For example, if you were going to contract with a professional printer to print those, this happens a lot in our international trainings where they contract with a printer who's in country. Now we also have an electronic PSA grower training manual as a resource, but I want to stress, and this is really, really important, this may not be used as a substitute for the printed manual for an in-person or a remote course. So Rob just dropped that link into the chat box, but basically this is an interactive PDF where all of the modules are in one PDF document together, really nicely organized by tabs so that you can navigate that in an electronic format. But again, this is not a resource that you would give to a participant and expect them to print out. And this is not a resource that they can use in lieu of having a printed manual. This is just a supplemental resource for those who like to use their laptop to take notes. They're more than welcome to do that, but they also need to have a physical printed manual as well. And these are just some of our common reminders. Make sure that you're registering your courses at least 2 weeks in advance. I know it's easy for remote trainings to kind of pop up quicker than an in-person training would, because you don't have the venue and the food and all the other logistics that go into planning that. But just make sure that you are giving AFTO at least 2 weeks lead time in terms of your registration. And again, if you ever forget to register a course, there will be an administrative fee for retroactive registration, but it's only accepted if we have all of the paperwork. So that would be you gave them evaluations, you had course documentation, meaning all of the participant attendance information, and proof that there was PSA lead trainer or trainer attendance. And again, you would be subject to an administrative fee in that particular situation. So make sure you're registering your courses at least 2 weeks in advance. And then the last reminder on this slide is about PSA lead trainer responsibilities. So as a reminder, even if you're using an assistant or somebody else that's helping you to host a PSA remote grower training or an in-person grower training, you as the PSA lead trainer are responsible for making sure that all of the paperwork is completed, returned to AFTO after the course concludes, and that the payment is made for those certificates in a timely fashion. We have a 6-month policy for payment of certificates so that participants are receiving those in a timely manner. And all lead trainers who participate in the course will be responsible for adhering to those policies. So even if it was one person's mistake and that person wasn't a lead trainer, it is ultimately the responsibility of all of the lead trainers who are registered with that course. And it could result in suspension or revoking of your lead trainer status if those policies are not followed. Some important links and resources for you as trainers. One thing that you may want to bookmark if you don't already have it bookmarked is the PowerPoint access. This is one of the most frequent emails I get from PSA trainers and lead trainers right before a training. They're like, where are the most recent PowerPoints? They're not actually publicly posted. So if you're just searching their website, it's actually on a hidden page, which is why I mentioned bookmark that URL. That will give you access to both the English and the Spanish PowerPoints for download. We also recommend that you keep your contact information up to date, and that goes into the database that we maintain with AFTO. We have a trainer directory, which is a great tool if you're looking for other PSA trainers or a lead trainer to join your group. But there is an update entry section. So if you've changed jobs, you've changed phone numbers, email addresses, any of that kind of stuff, you can update through the Update My Entry section in the training directory. And then as always, information about the annual meeting, any emails that we send out to the PSA trainer or lead trainer listserv, and information about additional resources and for example, the Train the Trainer refresher series that we're hosting every Thursday. All of that information is on our trainer update page. So do check there if you think you've missed a recent announcement or the emails got buried. We do keep those all on our website and up to date. And one of the last places that you should really be using heavily as a PSA trainer is if you navigate to resources. There is a drop down. The third one down is trainer resources. It is broken out by topic and by module, but there are some trainer specific resources that are slightly different than those that are listed under the general resource listing, which is more for growers and industry members. But these would be things like teaching tools, clicker questions, things that you might use in any one of your PSA trainings. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Donna, who's going to give you updates regarding FDA changes.
Yep, so over the next couple of slides, I'm going to highlight 3 main updates or announcements that FDA has made since our last update call. So these are all announcements that were made in the last year, since October 2019. The first update I want to mention is this temporary enforcement discretion policy. And this is a direct result to the COVID-19 pandemic. Back in May 2020, which actually feels like quite a long time ago at this point, FDA released this guidance for industry. And I want to highlight that this is a temporary policy. And essentially, it's intended to allow growers some more flexibility in adapting their food sales as a result of the pandemic. So for those of you guys who are familiar with the qualified exemption in the produce safety rule, there are two primary requirements that growers have to meet in order to meet that qualified exemption. So essentially, this temporary enforcement discretion would modify that qualified end user sales requirement. So normally, growers would have to sell to a majority of qualified end users in order to meet that qualified exemption. And this essentially amends that so that temporarily, it does not limit where farms can sell their products to get that qualified exemption. So I do want to remind you that the $500,000 cutoff for food sales still does apply. So that under this enforcement discretion, growers would have to still meet that $500,000 cutoff. And of course, it is adjusted for inflation. So currently we're talking about $560,000. And it does affect calculations using 2020 data. And if you want more information, just as a reminder, Rob is dropping the links to the complete announcements because it is sometimes difficult to summarize FDA announcements in a slide or two. So if you want more information on all of these, you can go to the links that Rob is dropping in the chat box. Next. And the main takeaway to kind of summarize the reasoning behind this temporary enforcement discretion is that farms that are currently eligible for the qualified exemption and associated modified requirements will still be considered eligible even if they shift food sales away from qualified end users. And again, this is a direct result of the pandemic, provided that they continue to meet the requirement that the average annual monetary value of all food is less than $500,000 adjusted for inflation. And that's a direct quote from the announcement itself. And I wanted to highlight here that the previous slide and this slide are actually available as supplemental teaching slides under the PSA Teaching Resources section of our website. And this is if you were working with maybe qualified exempt growers, you might be interested in using these slides during Module 1 when you present at grower trainings. Next, please. The next update I wanted to mention, this is actually more of an announcement. Back in August, FDA made an announcement that they are requesting additional information because they are considering expanding the rarely consumed raw list to include additional produce items. So for those trainers on the call, you are probably familiar with the fact sheet that FDA released about how they developed the rarely consumed raw list. And this is that list of 34 crops that are excluded from the produce safety rule. And as a reminder, there is a fact sheet in your grower training manual if you are not familiar with that list. And Rob also dropped the link into the chat box. So this announcement essentially says that FDA is requesting data on produce that could not be classified as rarely consumed raw due to low consumption in the United States. And as a reminder, there were a couple of factors that FDA used when developing this rarely consumed raw list. And one of the factors that they were looking at is total consumption in the United States. So they're looking for more than 1% of people to actually eat this type of produce. So we see this, you can see in the photo here, this is a picture of taro. So the Hawaiian Islands, some islands in the Caribbean, they produce a lot of taro, and that is not on the rarely consumed raw list, even though it is generally, it has to be cooked before eaten to break down some of the toxic capabilities. So this is an example of a product that people might be interested in having added to the rarely consumed raw list. And I know there are some groups that are working on gathering this type of survey data to present to FDA sort of in an attempt to have those products added to that list. And I do want to highlight here that this comment period ends on November 9th, which is coming up very, very soon. So if this is something that you might want to pursue, gathering the survey data, I highly recommend that you start getting on it. And again, there is more information in the chat box. Next. And the last FDA update that I wanted to present was the proposed rule for food traceability. And this is a proposed rule that was relatively recently, a couple of weeks ago. And essentially, the FDA has announced this proposed rule to establish additional traceability record keeping for certain food. So for certain foods. And because most of us work with produce growers, you will be interested to see that leafy greens, certain fresh cut fruits and vegetables, etc., are on this list for the proposed rule. So I've actually not read through the whole thing, so I'm still working on digesting it. But I really just wanted to highlight to you today that this exists. The link to the proposed rule is in the chat box. So if this is something that interests you or you might want to comment on it, the comment period does end January 21st, 2021. And I also want to mention that FDA is hosting 3 public meetings to discuss those requirements. And when I went and registered for one of the meetings, I saw that the room was limited, or I guess the Zoom room was limited. So if you're interested, you probably want to register pretty soon. And that's all that I have.
Awesome. So for the next 4 slides we're going to be looking at a few new PSA resources that have been released in 2020, as well as some updated resources that can help you with grower trainings and working with growers. So this first slide is just 2 of our resources that are more interactive activities. The first there is the clicker questions. Clicker questions were first intended to help with that in-person grower training and the use of iClickers to really be an interactive way to gauge knowledge of the growers and the participants in your course. And the second right there is a soil amendment activity. Again, you'll see the links to these in the chat, both found on the website. And it's a great way to be able to, again, work through some different examples of biological soil amendments of animal origin to really understand if everybody's kind of catching that concept of what treated versus untreated is as well. It's important to note these are supplemental activities. This isn't required for you to put into your grower trainings by any means, but they are great resources. And with that remote training, it's a really simple function to use the annotate function in Zoom to kind of gauge that interest and really get a little more participation in your trainings as well. Next slide, please. All right. 2 more things that are supplemental. First, I'll mention briefly, because Donna did a great job of describing it in the FDA update. You can see that second slide right there is for that temporary enforcement discretion for qualified exemption during COVID-19. So this is an example of the supplemental material that you can add into Module 1. But then also quickly noting the top slide there, and this is an enforcement discretion in regards to hops, wine grapes, pulses, and almonds. So again, guidance from, you can see the information on that slide there. You can put it into Module 1, but it's guidance for the industry released back in March of 2019 on the FDA not enforcing requirements for these specific commodities with the produce safety rule. But it is important to note that sales still count towards produce and food total sales. So again, aren't things that you have to use in your grower training, but if you know your audience or you know this is going to be a question, it might be a good thing to throw in there in Module 1 as well. And next slide. All right. So with resources, obviously we couldn't get away from talking about a few PSA COVID resources in a time like this. And so I quickly noted a few things here. We've already gone through a lot of our policy updates, the introduction of the temporary remote grower training. We also on that website, or our website, have a great FAQ there for remote grower training. If you haven't been able to get a hold of one of us, or you want to just kind of see what other folks or trainers have been asking, that's a pretty inclusive list right there. But again, if your question's not answered there, feel free to get in contact with one of us and we'll probably throw it up on that list after we talk with you. Also important to note, cleaning versus sanitizing fact sheet. This has been around for a while, but I know I've gotten a lot of good use out of it over the past few months. It's been in the forefront of everybody's mind when we are talking about cleaning and sanitizing as a whole in our operation, but then also with the addition of, COVID-19 preparation, stuff like that. And quickly here, we're going to talk about the sanitation tool or sanitizer tool that PSA released on the next slide. But it's important to note that there's a link to the EPA N list for the sanitizer tool. So the sanitizer tool itself was created as a way for farmers and educators to search sanitizers that might meet their needs. But the EPA N list was created specifically to help public find products that can be used in disinfecting and sanitizing surfaces that are contaminated with novel coronavirus, which causes COVID-19. So we want to bring to the forefront, we have it linked there to show that these tools are very different when you are choosing sanitizers. We always know in trainings, it's important to note that you are choosing one that is meant for its intended use. So we really want to highlight that. As well as we had some good collaboration and continue to have great collaboration with the IFS Institute for Food Safety at Cornell with some produce specific, produce-specific COVID-19 FAQs, office hours that were hosted, as well as a few fact sheets like this one here, protecting yourself and preventing a spread of COVID-19 on the farm. So next slide. Again, a few updated resources that we have. I've already mentioned the sanitizer tool. That sanitizer tool is updated to version 3.1 right there. So if you haven't been in there in a little while, there's been an addition of a few new products. A few other fact sheets to highlight. FSMA's produce safety rule documentation requirements for commercial soil amendment suppliers is up to date. This also includes that model certificate of confirmation and it's available in a Word format for those who are seeking that certificate of confirmation from their suppliers. And as well as something that, it's been up to date, but can never be used enough is the records required by FSMA for the produce safety rule. So there's a fact sheet as well as that Word format template. This is something that I really enjoy using in our grower training because everybody always has questions on which records are required, exactly do I need to know from each module. So take advantage of those. And with that, I will turn it over to Laura.
Thank you, Tommy. And hello, everybody. Next one, please. Yeah, thank you. The Spanish version of the PSA website was launched about a year ago in July 2019. And since then, many resources have been added. So I would like to bring your attention to the main tabs in the home page. Next. In the first tab, you will find information about the grower training course, the temporary policy for remote delivery of this course, frequently asked questions regarding such policy, and how to register courses with AFTO, and information about upcoming courses. The next tab is all about the Train the Trainer course, how to become a trainer, the steps to become lead trainer. Here you're going to find the trainer directory as well. Next. The trainer resources can be found in this menu, or they can be accessed through the tab that says resources, along with other general resources. Next. I want to emphasize the trainer updates highlighted in yellow there. This is information that we send you through the trainer listserv, and we have been sending these messages both in English and Spanish. You just have to scroll down to see the translation in Spanish below. And this is information that you don't want to miss. So if you can find those messages in your inbox, all you have to do is log into the website and check those messages here. Next. If you want to order grower training manuals, next, the information is in this menu. Or if you want to have a professional printing company print the manuals for you, you have access to the PDF files in this same menu. Next. I know this, you can barely see the text here. All I want to point out here is that all of this is the pages for the instructor resources. And I want to bring your attention to where the arrows are, because those are the most recent instructor resources for modules 1, 3, and 7. Next. Specifically, we have the enforcement discretion slides for the qualified exemption during COVID-19. and for those commodities that were mentioned before, hops, wine grapes, pulses, and almonds. We also have the soil amendment activity for Module 3, and for Module 7, we have the Farm Food Safety Plan. And in the general resources listing, we have new fact sheets available in Spanish. We have the documentation requirements for third-party suppliers of soil amendments fact sheet, along with the model of certificate of conformance. We have the cleaning and sanitizing fact sheet, the records required by the FSMA Produce Safety Rule, along with the templates. We have a few videos and a link to FDA's fact sheets on the FSMA Produce Safety Rule and draft guidance chapter summaries in Spanish. So please check back with for more information, for more resources. We're planning to upload the clicker questions in Spanish very soon, in a couple of weeks. And don't hesitate to contact me, Ricardo, or Davis for any Spanish language related information.
Okay, thanks, Laura. I'm going to turn it back over to Betsy to talk about some of our international training updates and where we're headed going into 2021.
Great, thanks. Good job, everyone. There's a lot going on in the chat box, and I want to thank everybody for their questions and the chats and stuff we've been able to address in the chat box and the Q&A. So we have been working with our international partners, and there's a lot going on. And as you can imagine, with a lot of different countries and a lot of different partners, it gets kind of complex. So we're continuing our work with the Produce International Partnership. Right now, the FDA has sort of put that a little bit on hold as they rearrange the leadership of that group. We've provided inputs to some FDA efforts working with other commodity-specific groups. We've been helping to support International Train the Trainers to expand the trainers that are available. As Don mentioned in his discussion about manuals for the online course, that's not just our problem. Getting manuals into the hands of people in foreign countries is very challenging. So that is also something that we work on and try to troubleshoot with different people. That has to do with the trainers who are in these locations as well. So there's a lot of challenges, but as you can see from the numbers that were presented, both in the remote trainings and in the in-person trainings that happened prior to COVID, there is certainly progress being made with trainings internationally. And I do want to take a moment to thank all of our international trainers that are involved in this call. And if you're listening to the recording, we cannot thank you enough for the collaboration, for communicating us when things become difficult or when you have challenges, because we can only troubleshoot things as we know their problems. One of the things Gretchen mentioned is taking the scanned evaluations. That was absolutely a result of working with our international trainers who let us know that mailing evaluations back was troublesome. So again, we're willing to change some of our practices if we can troubleshoot the problem and come to a solution that works for everybody. So I do want to say thank you to all of our international trainers who have let us know when they run into trouble, and we definitely try to help in that instance. The other thing we're working on is translations of the curriculum. Again, I want to give a shout out to Gretchen because she worked with Chinese translators to get the Chinese translation done. That was a deliverable for us on the cooperative agreement, and that is now in layout. So a shout out to Rob, who has the task of doing that. The international group has been working on a Portuguese translation, and that is nearing completion. So I'm guessing we'll see that as well quite shortly. We're also working with colleagues, in some cases with FSOP grants, to get translations in Korean. We have a couple of partners working on a Haitian Creole translation. We have a V1.1 done. We're trying to get that updated to V1.2. But again, huge amount of collaboration to get those things done. There is a new project we're working on with the Local Food Safety Collaborative to develop low literacy illustrations to complement the PSA grower training curriculum. In the last newsletter, there was a survey that went out. If you guys didn't happen to see that, I do want to encourage you to participate in that survey. But really what we're looking at is trying to reach people and adapt the curriculum where we can to help people understand those concepts. We know there are going to be farmers that speak a language that we don't have a curriculum for, right? Because we're not going to translate it into every language. So we really want to think strategically about how to get that information in an effective way to people that need it. Next slide. As you guys hopefully know, I'm guessing there are people on this call that actually have participated in the PSA Advanced Trainer Workshop. We had two, one last December and one this past January 2020. And we were prepared to start rolling this thing out to different locations. We were gonna host it in Geneva, New York this summer. And as you all know, we are still in the middle of a COVID outbreak. At this time, there is not a plan for offering these. I'm not saying we won't at some point think about it if this continues, but in some discussions with other people involved in the delivery of this, it is a very hands-on, can I say that one more time? Hands-on workshop. And trying to get this to be a remote thing would be I don't even know if it's possible. So right now, that's suspended until further notice. We will, of course, communicate and have discussions with our collaborators in the Southern Center, and we'll let everybody know. We're all very interested in doing this workshop again, because it was a very great experience, both as an instructor and the evaluations for the participants. But again, it's so hands-on, I can't imagine how we would do it remotely. Next slide. Funding update. So the good news is we're still here. The lights are on and we just hired some new people. So that's all good news. We did receive some additional funding this year, for which we are very thankful. The funding rate for the last couple of years has been at about 50% of the operating budget of the PSA. That, anybody who knows what 50% means, isn't really sustainable in the long term. But due to overlapping cooperative agreements, we've been able to manage, and we've been able to stretch funds by doing some other grant projects. We absolutely could use your support with elected officials, stakeholders, and just telling people what we do if you value what we do, and letting people know the position we serve that is unique and helpful to you. So if you're willing to write a letter or speak to your elected officials, or talk to other people about what we do, we're very interested in knowing that. So you can drop me an email, you can drop Gretchen an email, you can drop your regional extension associates an email, Tommy, Connie, Don, Donna, or the Spanish language extension associates an email, and let them know if you're willing to support that. We don't have anything planned right now, but occasionally we do have pushes where we reach out to people to let them know about our funding situation. So we always want to be prepared for that. I'm very hopeful. We're on good footing for a while, and we should be around, but funding is always an issue, especially during the COVID times when budgets are really stretched quite thin right now. Next slide, because I think that's going to go to our 11 years. Wow, last year we were like at 10 years. We were pretty excited to be around for a decade. And as you can see, at 11 years, we're still growing with some additional people that have joined us. I will say COVID-19 shook us all up a bit. I don't know about you guys, but I naively thought, oh, COVID-19, we can't travel. Think of all the publications we'll push out the door. It's not the way it happened. As you can tell from the slides that have been presented, we really had to do a lot of work with getting things remote, getting the online up and running. Things like, 3 different evaluations for the remote course. And again, thanks to all of you for letting us know when things weren't working so we could troubleshoot that. We have kept our focus on supporting growers and trainers. I hope you guys feel supported. If you don't, you should let me know. But we really have focused on the growers first and then the trainers. Everything Connie mentioned, the refresher courses, we really do keep you all in the forefront of our thinking and in the actions we do to support that kind of outreach. Adding the 2 new Spanish language extension associates will definitely give us bandwidth to expand what we're doing in the Spanish realm. As you know, Laura Acuna Maldonado has done a spectacular job, but it's a lonely gig being the only person on this team who speaks Spanish fluently. So we're happy to have the 2 new folks. As always, we really appreciate your collaboration. I mistakenly ended last year by saying, oh, the places left to go. Should never have said that, because I didn't know COVID was where we were going. And I won't add something stupid like that this year. I just do want to end my words by saying thank you. We all of us, all of the PSA members are keenly aware that the success of the PSA is dependent on collaboration, right? Whether it's doing trainings, whether it's developing educational materials, whether it's having an opportunity to review educational materials that people are putting out, we absolutely appreciate all of you, all that you do. Even when there's a problem, we appreciate knowing about it, because then we can work through to a solution that is good for stakeholders and good for trainers. So with that, I will say thank you, and I will turn it over to Gretchen, who's going to wrap this package up with a bow.
Yep. Yeah, and thanks for everyone for joining on this webinar today. We really do appreciate your time, and for all of the PSA team members who delivered content, and so you could actually see their faces, because I know we're all in different regions and you don't get to meet us in person all the time. But thanks to all you for your time. Our next annual meeting is going to be on Tuesday, October 26, 2021. That is a ways away. I will be sending out information about that in the wrap-up email. And again, this meeting was recorded. We will post the PDF of the slides that you saw here today, just in case you had any issues seeing them on your end. And we will also provide all of those links that we shared in the chat box. I know they were coming kind of fast and furious, and if you didn't get to all of them, don't worry, they will be in the wrap-up notes. I also wanted to put in a big plug for all of our social media accounts. Connie Fisk does a fantastic job keeping those all up to date with interesting content. So make sure you like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, on Instagram. We also have quite a bit of content on our YouTube page with videos that you can use during trainings, and a lot of meeting recordings, both from the educators group and then from trainer update calls as well. And if you aren't part of our PSA listserv, please do join that. That's where we send out our broader email updates. By default, you as PSA trainers and lead trainers do get trainer-specific emails, but we also have a general listserv which covers broader updates about programs, resources, FDA updates, those kind of things. And of course, our websites are a plethora of information, both in English and Spanish. So with that, again, thank you for your time. We look forward to working with you going into 2021, and please don't hesitate to contact any member of the PSA team if you have questions going forward. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week.